Welcome to Reality of Faith and Wisdom. My name is Yuri, and today we have a bonus edition, an extra on our podcast. We have an amazing, not only a dad, not only an artist, a dive instructor, but just an amazing dude by the name Dan Valentine. I love the last name. My name is Dan Valentine. Man, that's like that has to be the coolest last name in the world. Is it?
It's pretty good. It's a pretty good one.
Yeah. Thank you for being on this podcast. Thank you for being on this podcast. I want the purpose for this podcast. I don't want to speak a whole lot. The purpose for this podcast, I want you to share your life story, because there's going to be so many people that maybe not just maybe, but I know that they will be attached to your story because their story is the same, and the sin is the same. The problems are the same, and I know what you're about to share, and especially the ending, how you got the artwork and your purpose and goals and dreams. You get to the point, you got to this point of understanding who you are and the purpose that God gave you and the gifts that God put it inside you. So I'm gonna ask you some questions, and man, you tell us everything. First of all, tell us a little bit about your childhood. Tell us a little bit about how you came into this world, and in this world just opened these wide doors for you, and how this whole childhood bit. Tell me a little bit.
Well, I kind of feel like I've got to start with my parents a little bit to kind of explain my childhood. So my mother grew up in Malibu. Her parents had inherited a bunch of money and they moved to Malibu, and she grew up with next to all these movie stars. Her parents were involved in a cult, and it wasn't like a straight up satanic cult, but it was close. There was a spirit medium that would get inhabited by a demon, and it was a female, but a man's voice would speak through her, and it was all these Hollywood people, and then her parents in this weird cult, and she was a little girl, and her dad was a pedophile and a child rapist. So he raped her and her little brother. And then he would sell her out to the other people that were in the cult. And it was really bad. And my mother's mother, instead of protecting her, when my mother, turned like 13 and was able to be like, why is this happening? When she started to realize something was wrong, her mother told her that it was her fault, and, that she was a slut. And that's why this was happening. So my mom developed multiple personalities. That's what they called it back then. But now it's called dissociative identity disorder. And that's where something happens to you that completely surpasses your body's tolerance for pain. You get so traumatized that you can't function. So your brain creates a new personality that event did not happen to. And you kind of inhabit that personality. And that's how you get through life. But the problem is she had 21 different personalities, like legitimately, like the book Sybil, like for real.
Wow.
And when she would flip into these alternate personalities, she would lose time, and she wouldn't necessarily remember what she did or said when she was in these alternate personalities. So when my dad met her, she was like 19 and my dad was like 20, and he had made friends with her father, and they had a painting company together. And then, he met her, and then they, started, I want to use the word dating, but they didn't start dating. They just, started having sex. She got pregnant with me. And when she got pregnant with me, my dad's relationship with her father started to like crumble really bad. And something happened, and my dad pulled a gun on him. I think they both threw guns on each other. And police got called, and then the FBI got called. And so my dad grabbed my mom and left the state and moved to Georgia. Wow. And also worth saying that when my mother's mother found out that she was pregnant and not married, she took my mother to the doctor, and the doctor and my grandmother both ganged up on my mother and tried to make her get an abortion.
Wow.
And she was as sick, as mentally ill and crazy as she was, as traumatized as she was at 19 and pregnant. She told him, she was like, screw you. She actually cussed him out. She's like, no, I'm not doing it. That's pretty cool to have two people ganging up on this sick girl saying, get an abortion. And then something just told her, no, I'm not doing it. So that kind of gives me chills when I think about that, because, yeah. So anyway, they moved to
God's got a purpose for you, man. God's got a purpose for you.
Yeah, the devil's trying to kill me for real. I felt that way all my life. So they moved to Georgia, and my dad's parents were there. My dad's parents were good people. They were Christians. They were good people. So, and I got snatched out of that darkness. I'm really like, if my dad had just left and not taken my mother, I probably would have been aborted, or I would have been raised in that horrible darkness, and who knows what my life would have been like. So they, I got snatched out of that situation, lived in Georgia, and my dad was a pretty crazy character too, and I'll get to that in a minute. But their relationship didn't last, and when they got divorced, my mom was so sick that she said to the court, she was like, give the kids to their grandparents because I can't take care of them. So that happened when I was like 5 years old, and but I don't remember it. So we moved in my dad moved in with my grandparents. So my grandparents raised me in Atlanta, and my dad was there too. He was my dad, but he was more like my older brother in a way. But he was my dad. But I was really kind of raised by my grandparents at that point. And they were good people. My grandma was, she was a Christian. She's the one that led me to God when I was like 7 years old. But I don't remember any events in my life before 7 years of age. I don't remember anything. My parents had nothing. Yeah, I have no memory before I was 7. So yeah, that's.
And how long it's been when you were raised by your grandparents?
They raised me until I was like 13 and a half, because then my dad ended up getting remarried, and I moved in with my dad for a little while, and then my dad ended up living next to my grandparents, and so I would kind of go back and forth. But when I was 14, I moved in with my dad like permanently, and I'm going to skip back. And during that time, I would go and see my mom like every other weekend. Sometimes I wouldn't see her that often. Sometimes I'd see her every other weekend. And she was, she was living her life, like trying to get better, but she was not, she wasn't really okay. She was.
Is she still alive?
She's still alive, and God healed her. And God healed her from having 21 different people in her head, 21 different personalities. And when she would go to therapy, she would go to different psychologists, psychiatrists, even Christian psychiatrists, and they'd say stuff to her like, listen, we don't know a lot about this, multiple personalities. We don't know a lot about it, but we do know that no one ever gets better. And you just need to get on disability and get on medication and just live out your life. And that was the best advice she got. And she was totally alone. Like she moved to Georgia, had no family. She had these guys and these husbands that she would get with, but she wasn't really great at picking the right guy. So she had really no support. And she still got through it. She still survived. And then when she was 50, God completely delivered her from all of it. Wow. Which, that's what they say. People don't get better from this. But she got completely healed, completely delivered. And I saw it. I mean, it really happened.
And it's never too late, man. It's never too late. It's you can get delivered and healed in 20s and 40s and 50s, 60s, 70s, and move on. Now let's move to you're 13, 14. You moved in with your dad. Okay. Tell us a little bit about that season.
All right. So I had always had trouble in school. I moved around to a bunch of different schools. And my dad, I really loved my dad. My dad was a really cool guy. Okay. He was my dad could play guitar and sing. He was a really good looking guy. He was a model in Atlanta. He was really talented. He could paint. He was an artist. He could surf. I mean, he'd grown up in California for part of his life. So, I mean, he was a really cool guy, charismatic guy. So I loved my dad. I mean, I would look around at other kids' dads and I'd be like, my dad is freaking cool. And he was really cool, but he was tweaked. And he was very unhappy and very discontent and very angry. And when he was a kid, he got moved around every 2 years because his father, he opened all these stores for Napa Auto Parts. That was his job. So he'd move every 2 years. So it made my dad kind of crazy. I don't know what made him crazy. I think it's a spiritual sickness, but that was part of it, moving around all the time. And so my dad really hated school. And I remember my first day of school, my parents waking me up and going like, what's going on? Like, why are you waking me up? I remember this clearly. And they're going like, my dad's like, you got to go to school, man. And I was like, well, I'm tired. He's like, you gotta go. It sucks, I know, but you gotta go, man. And then I get there at school. I'm like, man, I really don't like this. And I get home. My dad's like, yeah, I hate school too. And it was pretty much like that the whole time. My dad's like, he was, instead of being like, you're going to be okay. We're going to get you through this. He's like, yeah, this does suck, man. It does suck. This is horrible. I hated it too.
It was a great encouragement, man.
So I bounced around from different schools, and then I homeschooled. I skipped sixth grade, and then went to seventh grade, and I didn't really have any social skills, and all this stuff happened. I'd broken my leg. I was in a full leg cast. Kids were making fun of me, and I just hated it. And my grandpa and my stepmom were like, we could homeschool you. My grandpa was a really smart dude, and he was a history major, although he never used that. He was in corporate America, but he was, he'd like fought in World War II and all. He was a really dynamic, really cool character. So he homeschooled me for like half of seventh and all of eighth grade. And I learned a lot of stuff from my grandpa. I learned a lot about history and everything. And but I still wasn't developing any of those social skills. And I was kind of a restless, irritable, discontent child anyway, like a highly sensitive, just kind of a...
And then drugs came in and magnified that even more.
So I get to ninth grade, and some football player's girlfriend thought I was cute or something, so he made up a rumor that I was gay, and the whole school was in on it. And everybody, I didn't have any friends, and every day in the lunchroom when I would go, and this was North Georgia in 1997. Okay, so number one, I wasn't gay, but number two, there was no safe. Like now, if you're gay, like there's people will protect you. There's safe places for that. Back then, I was just getting horribly bullied. This was a redneck place. This was North Georgia. So
oh my gosh,
that was the worst rumor somebody could make up about you. So I was going to school every day dealing with this abuse, and then when I would try to clear my tray in the lunchroom, I had to walk by this table of these guys, and they were like seniors or football players. They were bigger than me, and they'd be like, faggot, queer, just yelling all this stuff at me, and the whole school would like point at me and laugh. Everybody would look at me, and everybody would start yelling. It was horrible. And this went on for like 3 months, and then I told my dad, I was like, Dad, I want to quit school. I hate this, man. I hate these people. I want to quit school. And screw this. I know I'm not old enough, but I'm not going back here. And he's like, well, you should at least, beat the guy's ass before you leave. And I was like, I can't, man. He's bigger than me. And he's like, yeah, you can. So when I'd homeschooled and before then, like my dad got me hooked on like Bruce Lee movies and stuff. So I was, I'd taken karate and I'd taken ninjutsu. So, and my dad had kind of like taught me to box a little bit. So I actually knew how to fight. I was just like tall and skinny. I was like 6'2" and like 150 pounds, 160 pounds.
You were just like Bruce Lee?
Yeah, so no. But I was skinny, crazy white. I was probably more psychotic than Bruce Lee at that point. But I was freaking crazy. But so my dad's like, you can take this guy. He's like, isn't he sitting down when he yells at you? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, is he wearing glasses? And I said, yeah. And he's like, perfect. He's like, here's what you do. Don't say a word. Walk up to him and start hitting him. And hit him as hard as you can, as many times as you can, and don't stop. If you stop, he will get up and he'll completely beat your ass. He said, and if you do this, if you do what I tell you and you keep hitting, somebody will eventually break the fight up. They'll jump on you and they'll break the fight up. But if you stop hitting and you wait for him, you regroup, he's going to totally take you down. So I was like, all right, Dad. So the first thing I did was I knew where all these guys kept their book bags, where all their books were for school, because we didn't have enough lockers. They had these like trailers outside. So I snuck into their trailer and I took all their book bags while they were at lunch, and I threw all their book bags up on top of the roof of the school. And you had to turn your books in or it was a $400 fine. So I had like 6 guys, all the jocks, like the star football players. I threw their books up on the roof. And later that day, they're like over the intercom, if anyone knows where these books have been, if anyone knows who stole these books or where they are, just please tell us. No questions asked. Please turn them in. They're like naming everybody's name. So then I go to lunch. And the guys are waiting for me, and they're like, we know you took our books. We know you did this. And I was like, you humiliate me every day. I was like, I didn't take your books. And I lied. And then I, go to lunch, and they start doing their thing and screaming at me and humiliating me. And then the next day, I come, and they start doing the same thing. And I go, and I clear my tray, and then I walk up to the guy, and he's like, oh my God, he's here. And they're just like looking at me laughing. I'm standing right over the guy. And so I just start bah, 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 bah. I just start wailing on him, like hitting him as fast as I can, as hard as I can. Like I felt the the glass break under my hands. I felt, I was beating glass into the guy's face. And he still like stood up and like came at me, and we're like sliding around in blood at this point. And he's like, just, and he rips a pocket off my shirt. And then the the football coaches jump on us and they break it up. So the whole fight lasted like maybe 10 seconds, But he gets up and he's a bloody mess. And the football coaches are holding him and holding me. And I'm like, don't have a scratch on me. So it worked. And then I look around and the whole school is looking at me. And I'm just like, my one guy, he's like, Daniel, hold up your arm. And I hold up my hand and it's like covered in blood. And I looked around, I saw everybody. Instead of, making fun of me and laughing at me, everybody was afraid. And I saw that and I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
All right. And that changed my whole life. It's like, all right, if I show up with enough wrath, if I bring my wrath and I show up with enough velocity and enough anger and enough violence, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to ever be abused again. If I show up, this is all I got to do. I just got to bring the wrath. And if I bring that and bring the violence and be willing to be more violent than anybody else, I can do whatever I want.
Wow.
And nobody's ever going to mess with me again.
So now
that changed. That was major.
And your dad was part of it, even though he gave you some good advice to some extent, how to fight for yourself, but it wasn't good advice. He was preparing you for the even bigger downfall, because now you took that wrath and now you can use it. Now let's move on a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your drugs and about how you started doing Venetian plaster and all these things and how you operated within the drug world. I mean, you said it woke you up. You said it gave you strength. Share a little bit.
Yeah. So I got to go back just for a second. So when I left, after that fight, I got suspended. I came back to school. I didn't have the teachers had not given me zeros. They'd known that I was being bullied. They didn't do anything about it. So I didn't get held back or anything. I got to progress. And I didn't have any friends that year. But that summer, between 9th and 10th grade, my dad started giving me drugs. And what he did was he took me to Mexico, and it was weird because he really loved me in a way, but he loved doing drugs. So that was like one of the ways he showed love for me. Like we went to Mexico and went to the highlands of Mexico, and he stopped at this orange juice bar where they make peyote drinks for the truck drivers that are on the Pan American Highway. And he got a bunch of peyote. He could speak Spanish, cool guy, could speak Spanish. And he got this peyote drink. So we drink all this peyote. So we're going through the desert, and I'm starting to trip on mescaline. I'm just like having this crazy experience, and he is too. And the problem is he was a professing Christian, and he was, he would constantly be talking about the Bible, and he had these like grandiose ideas about Revelation and everything. So I was given this form of Christianity that was completely insane. Like take Christianity and add a bunch of LSD and mescaline and cocaine and amphetamine to it, and you get this crazy cult leader type personality. That was my dad. And that's what I got programmed with. Like, this is Christianity, this is God, this is spirituality. So I didn't have a relationship with God. I thought I did, because I did believe in God. I believed in Jesus. But you take that, you give somebody that narrative, the Christian narrative, and then you give them a bunch of drugs. And drugs feel like the Holy Spirit. It's a counterfeit Holy Spirit. It's a fleeting, temporary peace. I call it the counterfeit peace, because when you really have the Holy Spirit, you get peace. That's the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's real. Drugs give you a very watered down, weak, temporary version of that. So I was a Christian that thought I had the Holy Spirit, but I didn't. I had drugs. So when he started giving me drugs that summer after I got back from Mexico, he gave me, that's when I started drinking heavy. He gave me acid. He gave me cocaine. He gave me meth. My dad, he had good drugs. So these were powerful drugs. So, but he would do things like only use them. Like, we're only going to do meth on Friday this week because, we don't do meth every day. We're not meth heads. It's crystal meth Friday. We're painting, we're working, we can do meth. You're doing it to get through the job, And then, of course, we have to drink, at the end of the day because we worked hard. So I just I would work with him every summer. He was an artist. He was a decorative painter. He would do all these faux finishes in people's house. So I worked with him every summer, and since I was 13. And then after he started giving me drugs and everything, it was just totally normal to work and do drugs and to use drugs to control exactly how you feel. So you take a kid who's already, highly sensitive, artistic, irritable, discontent, that's got some trauma in his life, and then you show him, how to deal with the world, and the solution that you give him is you can control every waking moment of how you feel with a substance, and it's completely okay to do that. In fact, if you don't do it, you're kind of stupid. Like, we have all these drugs They're awesome technology. That's what they are. Drugs are technology. So why wouldn't you use this technology to control how you feel every day, especially if you don't feel good? And I didn't feel good. I didn't have a lot of energy. I didn't feel good in my head. I didn't feel good at all. I was depressed. I was angry. So taking drugs was like the ultimate solution. So on one end, I had my grandparents that wanted me to like finish school and go to college. But man, after that summer, after I got introduced to all these drugs, after I got in that fight, man, I went back to 10th grade and there was like no way that I was ever going to be able to get through school and have a normal college life, anything like that. There's no way that was going to happen. So I ended up dropping out of school in 11th grade. And my dad had this rule that, like I said, he was a professing Christian. So the rule was, you can do drugs, that's fine. You can go to parties. Parties are great. Just don't have sex. Don't have sex with anyone. Which is a little bit of an insane rule because when you're young and you're a kid and you're a teenager and you're going to parties and doing drugs, the next logical chain of events, the next thing that typically happens is you have sex with someone. Yeah. So that's what happened. I had sex with someone. My dad found out about it, and he was friends with all my friends because they were always coming over to the house to party. So somehow he overheard, somehow he found out about it. And he like flipped out and made me drop out of school. That's it, you're out of school. You're coming to work with me full time. And I was like, okay. So I worked with him for like a few months, and then I was like, can't be around you anymore. So I was still living at his house, but I was doing jobs on my own. I was like knocking on doors and like, I knocked on like 50 doors one day in a subdivision up in Georgia, and like just was getting paint. I was painting houses, getting paint jobs and doing these, but I could do these decorative finishes. And so I met this architect, and I was like 18 when I met this guy, and he goes, "Can you do Venetian plaster?" And I was like, "Yeah, what is it?" And he shows me a sample of it. He's got it in his office. He's like, "This is Italian polished plaster. This is from Italy, and this is what's coming to the United States. And there's a company that imports it, and they need certified applicators." And he goes, "You should learn how to do this." So I was like, okay. So I called the company that was importing it, and I told them I had a painting business in Atlanta. I didn't tell them I was 18. And they were like, "Great, we need a certified applicator for Atlanta." And they're like, "You can go to Italy and learn how to do this. It's $3,000, but we'll subsidize the rest of the trip. You just need to, $3,000, you need a plane ticket." So I had the money to go, and because I was working. So I paid them to go to Italy, and I got a flight pass from my aunt, who was a flight attendant. So I got to fly for free. So I went to Italy, and I learned how to do Venetian plaster. So when I got back to the United States, I was this was like the year 2000. Nobody could do it back then. I was like one of the only guys that could do it. And then I ended up, my dad had been a model. He'd been in that world, like fashion world in Atlanta. And so he had always talked about that. So he kind of like said, "Yeah, you should go do that." So I went and I met these photographers. The first thing you do is you go around, you meet these photographers, and if they like the way you look, they'll shoot you for free. They'll do a test for free. So then you have some shots, and you can take the shots to the modeling agencies, and if they like you, they'll sign you. So I met these photographers, and one guy was like, "Yeah, okay, we could do something." And then I was like, "Hey man, I could paint backdrops for you. I can do all these finishes. I can do Venetian plaster. I could do we could work something out." So I ended up painting backdrops for these photographers. And so I got all the pictures taken for free. And then I got signed to an agent in Atlanta. And then they would send me on these gigs to just for catalogs, shoots and stuff like that. And then one of the things they sent me on, there was a Gucci show in Atlanta. And for some reason, they weren't using the regular models that were signed to the campaign. And they sent me on audition for the show. So I go to the audition, and they put a suit on me, and it fit me perfect. So I got this Gucci show in Atlanta, which was a big deal because a lot of male models had gone and tried to get that show, and I got it. The suit fit, I got it. So I'm there, and the woman that's doing my makeup, the people are starting to come in, and she's like, "Wow," she's like, "That's that famous architect." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "That's that guy right there is a famous architect. He did Elton John's house, and they're in Architectural Digest." And I said, "Point him out to me." She pointed him out to me. So I was standing there in this suit after the show, and I saw the guy, and I waited for him to come up to me. And as soon as he got close, I was like, "Hey, are you an architect?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I realized he's an older gay man. I'm like, "Okay, how do I deal with this?"
You got a PTSD from school.
Yeah, and he's like, "Yes." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "My name's Daniel," and I'm standing there 18 years old. I'm in this Gucci suit, and I go, "I just got back from Italy, and I know how to do Venetian plaster." And he goes, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, why don't you come show us your stuff?" And I was like, "Okay." And he gives me his card. So the next day I call the guy, and his receptionist picks up, and they tell me, "Okay, well, if Reynolds told you to come in, you need to come in and bring your samples." Like, okay. So I drive in that week and I show him all my samples, and I meet with the head guy. His name's Stan Topol, and he's a famous designer. So they were like, great, you can do this. Well, we can use this. So I ended up doing a bunch of work for these guys in Atlanta. They're like the best designers in Atlanta. And I learned from them like how to make the colors right and everything. And so that was how I got into Venetian plaster. And I did that for like the next 10 years.
So now let's move forward. Now you're 38, 37, you're going through divorce, you've been married, you have a wonderful child. You're still full of drugs. You're still messed up to some extent, right?
Yeah. So
give me that ending that you finally like. You know what? I'm done. Like because this whole thing prepared you for success and for a failure in a lot of ways. More for failure than success. more for failure than success. Yet you were introduced to so many people. Tell me. Let's move forward just a bit.
Yeah. So I was doing these interesting things that people thought were cool. So, people were like, you're doing great, Dan. But the thing is, the whole time I was propping myself up with drugs the whole time. Like I had prescriptions for Adderall, and I was able to like get one doctor to write me a prescription for Adderall, which is amphetamines. And then I get a psychiatrist to write me a prescription for Dexedrine, which is another type of amphetamines. It's the same thing, but have different names, so you can get both of them. The pharmacy doesn't care. So I just was eating just tons of.
Obviously, you're very intelligent in that world.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it intelligent.
It's past.
But so I and then later on, I figured out that I could order all the drugs that I needed. I would order whatever I needed from these. Like I needed, I always drank alcohol, and alcohol was like always there for me. When I drank alcohol, it fixed everything. But the problem is I would take amphetamines in the morning, and then I would drink alcohol to come down from the amphetamines, and then I would wake up feeling all jittery. And so I needed to take tranquilizers to deal with the jitters from the alcohol. And I realized that I could buy that stuff I could order it from a laboratory in China. So that's what I did. And it would come in powder, and then I would carefully measure it and mix it. Well, I had these milligram scales, and I would mix it into, grain alcohol at a specific ratio and pull out 1 milliliter, and that was 1 milligram. And so but I had like an unlimited supply. I would have like 4,000 doses at once, and it was just mine. I wasn't sharing it.
Wow.
And then I figured out that I could. I liked opioids a lot. Opioids, just completely. I could work. My thing was I would take drugs so that I could work, because I always had like low energy, never felt good. When I would take drugs, I could work, and that was fine. So in my mind, I wasn't really a drug addict because I was taking drugs to work. I thought drug addicts were people that were like using needles in the street and homeless. I thought that's what a drug addict was. So then I figured out...
You were an intelligent drug addict.
I want to call it that. I don't know what to call it. It was insane. But I figured out that I could order... in England, they grow these genetically modified opium poppies for the pharmaceutical industry. And this company somehow was able to get all the seeds from these poppies, and they're covered in opium latex. And they were selling them as baking goods. So I figured out found these people on the internet, and I found a source for these opium poppy seeds. So I would order them and buy them like big 10-pound bags, and then I would mix a little bit of water and vinegar, and I would wash the opium off the seeds, and I was making laudanum. I was making opium tincture, like 1800s opium tincture. And it was really powerful. So I was taking that. So I was taking amphetamines. I was taking that, opium tincture that I was making. I was taking the benzodiazepine powder that I was getting from China. I was drinking a lot of alcohol, and I was taking antipsychotic drugs that were prescribed by psychiatrists and antidepressants. So
wow.
That went on from I started drinking and doing drugs when I was like 14, and then 18, 19 was when I started really getting heavy.
Really getting
so
into
that went on until I was 39. So
let's stop here for a second, because I have two more questions for you for this podcast. And question number one. Now you were in turmoil. Now you were. I remember when I met you. You were all skin and bones. You were literally. You were angry at everything. You didn't want to live anymore. You wanted to be gone almost from this world. You were worried for your kid. You were worried for your wife. You haven't forgiven your dad because dad set you up for all this. So there was a lot going on. And now it was this bomb that was forming inside of you And finally, you had two choices. Either really that bomb's going to explode and the life is going to be gone, or you need to change your life around. So now let's stop here for a second and let's really go back to this question. Your past has been preparing you for something. And more or less, your past and everything you went through, it was like a bomb that was ticking. And it can destroy you completely and destroy your life as you know it in general, or you have opportunity to change your life. Somewhere along the way, you probably thought of that, right? You probably thought about how do I change? Now you're married. Now you have a kid. Now you're going through a divorce. You can't forgive your dad for what he did, even though he was trying to raise you the way he knew how to raise you, right? To the best of his abilities. And all these things, it's like inside of you. And now you're in your late 30s or whatever. Tell me a little bit how this whole thing happened, how you went from the total darkness and everything that you described to start finally opening the door to light, to the light of God.
So when I was 35 when my daughter was born, and I started to realize that I had a problem. Like I started to realize that, because before that I thought it was normal to take drugs and to control how you feel. I thought that was completely normal. And then I woke up and realized like it's not normal. And I realized I was an alcoholic. And so I was trying to get better, but I didn't really know how. And
were you trying to suppress that? I want to stop you here. Were you trying to suppress the idea that, well, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm in control. When did you realize that it was in control of you and not the other way around?
Okay. So I was trying to I thought my problem was opioids, because the opioids cause, when you try to stop taking opioids, when you've been on them for a long time, you get really, really sick. So I knew that when I tried to stop those, I got really sick. So I thought, well, that's my problem, opioids. With other drugs, I could quit and wouldn't feel great, but I wouldn't go through horrible withdrawals. So I was trying to figure out how to get off opioids. So I was doing all this research, and I found out about this treatment called Ibogaine, which is a psychedelic root from Africa. And it's the most powerful psychedelic in the world. And they use it as a coming of age ceremony in Gabon. But anyway, in the Western world, they use it as a treatment for addiction. And they have these clinics in Mexico. It's illegal in the United States, but in Mexico you can go and they have a clinical setting with a doctor, and they weigh you and then they give you a dose of Ibogaine, and you have this trip for like 30 hours straight. And it's ruthless. It's the worst trip ever. Like you relive all the trauma you've ever had in your life, and it makes you look at everything you've ever done wrong. And when I was under the influence of that drug, I realized I was an alcoholic. And I wouldn't recommend that people take powerful psychedelics to get clarity about things if they're sober, but I was so clouded. I was on so many drugs, and I was so clouded that particular psychedelic drug, Ibogaine, that was a forced moment of clarity for me. So I realized I'm an alcoholic, and I realized, I knew I was bad. I knew things were bad, but then I realized how bad they were. But anyway, the other thing about this particular drug is you wake up from it after the 30 hours, and it rips all the opioids out of your receptors and fills it in with Ibogaine alkaloids. So you wake up and you're not addicted to opioids anymore. You're not addicted to stimulants either. You can also use it to come off antidepressants. So you wake up, and it's like a magic bullet. You're not addicted to drugs anymore. And you're like, wow, I feel great. And it lasts about 3 months. So I would go home, and I would feel good for 3 months, and then I would relapse. I'd turn back into who I was, and I would relapse. And I went down to Mexico and took that drug like 7 times.
Wow.
And other people I would meet took it one time, and they got better, never did a drug again. But I would go down there like, I've been here 7 times, I'm still not getting better. And in the meantime, I tried to go to AA, but I wasn't humble enough to listen to anybody. Because when you go to AA meetings at first, it's confusing. You don't understand why it works. And you see a bunch of people sometimes that are kind of down and kind of sad. Some of the meetings can be kind of sad. And I heard these guys saying stuff like, well, if I don't do these steps, I don't go to these meetings, I'll drink, And I was thinking like, it seems like if you don't come to these miserable meetings with your miserable steps, you're going to drink yourself to death. I think I'm happier than you doing drugs and drinking, so I'll just stay where I'm at. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then finally, I met Jason Genholster, Pastor Jason.
Yeah.
The care pastor.
Yeah, our care pastor at Impulse Church.
Yeah, covered with tattoos, like cool guy, builds motorcycles, Just Jason's a cool dude. And I saw him at an Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and I checked myself into rehab, like paid for myself to go to rehab in the United States after going to Mexico and taking those Ibogaine treatments. So I went to rehab, and I was like, this is BS. I'm not doing this. I checked myself in, and then I checked myself out. I left. But during that time, I met Jason, And I saw him in this room, and he was cool, and he was with Jenna. So I was like, that guy's cool. He's got a good looking wife. He's cool. And I was like, hey man, will you sponsor me? And he's like, yeah. So then we would meet, and he was telling me, he was more honest with me than anybody had ever been. And I couldn't like do this verbal judo with him and like outmaneuver him, because he was just telling me the truth and just telling me stuff that I couldn't refute.
See, he was loving you. That's one face of love, because we think love is only encourage me, make me feel good. No, love is truth.
No, this was
love is bold. Love is brutal, man.
Yeah.
Love will tell you honest the way things are with you, and that's exactly what he did. Come on, yeah.
What he said to me was, he goes, we're talking, he's like, your real problem, man, is you don't have any spirituality. And I was like, I'm a Christian, man. Like, yes, I do. I've got spirituality, like I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe in God. I know God's real. But I didn't have any spirituality. He was completely right. And I remember being like really offended and then going home thinking about, like, God, is he right? Like, he is right. He was right. So then I left rehab, and I stopped talking to Jason. But he was the only person I ever listened to. So fast forward like 5 years, and everything that people had told me would happen was happening. Like my wife also had issues with addiction and alcohol, and she started sleeping with people other than me, and that had never happened before. So I had to. That like ripped me apart, like, because I really loved my wife, and we were like really codependent. We had like trauma bonded when we were really, really young, and we had been together for like 20 years and married for 16. So when that happened, I'm not mad at her. I'm not blaming her. I'm not trying to bash her at all. But when that happened, because she was sick too. She was married to me, and I was sick, so she was sick too to be married to me. And but when that happened, it ripped me apart and just like tore me down, and it shattered my ego, because I mean, when your wife does that,
your best
to you,
friend, yeah,
it just destroys you. And so it happened once. I took her back, and then it happened again. And the second time it happened, I was crazy. Like, I was like thinking about killing her and her boyfriend, like. And I remember having a plan in my head, and then God speaking to me and saying, you could do that, but you're not a murderer. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And I was like, man, I was in a really bad place. And Jason calls me out of the blue. I hadn't talked to the guy in 5 years. And he goes, hey, man. And his number pops up on my phone. I'm like, does he know what's going on? And I'm like, hey. And he's like, hey, do you remember me? And I'm like, yeah, of course I remember you. And he's like, can you come give me a bid for some Venetian plaster? You're the only person I've ever met that's even ever talked about it. And I was like, yeah, I can come give you a bid. So I come, give him a bid, and I end up doing the job. It's like a 2-day job. And he's like, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm doing fine, lying. And then at the end of the job, I'm talking to him, and I'm asking him about his life. And he's still married to the same woman. He's happy. His construction crew's grown. He's getting ordained as a pastor. And I'm going like, man, this guy's life's going really good. My life is going horrible. That's what I'm thinking. And so then I go, hey, man, are you still going to those meetings? And he's like, yeah, I am. I'm going to one right now, actually. You want to come? And I was like, yes, I would like to come.
So it's got a point of moment.
I go to the meeting and just lose it. Just freak out, tell everybody what I'm thinking, tell them I have a plan, thinking about killing my wife and her boyfriend, just total anger, total wrath, just losing my cool. Telling everybody what's going on. And I'm like, but I can't do that, right? I can't kill my wife and her boyfriend because I told you guys what I'm going to do, right? And they're going, yes, if you do that, we will call the police. And I'm going like, good. That was like a relief. And then they tell me, they're like, listen, you've got to come back here, because if you don't, you're going to kill somebody and you're going to go to jail. You're going to kill yourself. Like, you're going to die. Like, you've got to come back here. And that group of men, it's a small group of men, and it's AA, but they're Christian men. Jason wasn't just at the meeting, he was chairing the meeting. Jason runs these meetings, okay? And they're the only people on the planet that would have listened to me, because I was insane, I was homicidal, I was nuts. Just you take a guy that's on that many drugs and that crazy, and then you throw in some infidelity from his wife. That's like shaking up a jar of hornets, man. Like, I really was like crazy homicidal. And another guy that goes to the meetings, he told me later on, he said, when you started coming to the meetings, I started bringing a pistol with me.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. So, but what happened is, after I said all that, they told me, you have to come back here. You've got to come back and keep hanging out with us. No one else on earth would have said that. Not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. They would have called the police. They would have been required to call the police.
Yeah.
Those are the only people on earth that would have helped me. And so I was like, okay. Because I was like, I'm all out. Like normally I would argue with you or tell you you're wrong or say that this stuff doesn't work or that AA is a cult or BS or whatever. But at this point I was just like, all right, I'll do whatever you tell me. And then later, a little while later, I was, still drinking, still using. And I was like really afraid that my ex-wife was going to take my daughter because my story was so insane. I did so many crazy things. I thought she's going to tell the judge half of this. And if he believes a third of it, he's going to take my daughter away. I was really afraid. And she was still using. And I was telling Jason how scared I am of losing my daughter. And he said, well, if you really love your daughter, you'll do the right thing. And I said, which is what? And this is how confused I was. And he goes, stop drinking, stop using drugs. And I was like, okay. And I realized in that moment that my daughter was going to have a terrible life with 2 addict parents because of me. Wow. Because of me. And then I looked back and I realized I saw what my dad did to me. The whole cycle was going to continue. And I could not deal with that. It just something happened. And I went home that night and I had a bottle of liquor and I looked at it and God took away the desire to drink it. Because I had stopped before, but our obsession to drink was always there. The obsession to use drugs was always there. And that seems like a worse hell than anything is being sober, but still being obsessed. That's hell.
Yeah.
You'd rather be dead or drunk or using than be in that hell. It's called like white knuckling. It's called being a dry drunk. And I never believed that God could take away the obsession to use because that was who I was, all I'd ever known. And that night I went home and I looked at this bottle and I didn't have to drink it. Wow. And it was they call that a white light experience when that happens. I didn't see a white light, but that means when something supernatural happens. And that happened to me. That happened. And then I didn't have to drink anymore. And so I kept going to the meetings. And then Jason ended up sponsoring me. And my ex-wife, she did not get better. And then I ended up getting full custody of my daughter. So went from thinking I was going to lose my daughter to getting full custody of her. And then I was able to keep her safe. And I was able to have a relationship with her. And during this time, she went from being a little baby, being 5.5 to now she's almost 8. And during this time that I had full custody of her, she really came online. Like kids come online. Like kids wake up and all of a sudden you can't lie to them. You can't really, they're asking questions and they're aware of what's going on. And that happened. And that happened when I was sober. And I'm so glad that it did because I have a relationship with her now. Whereas when she was younger, I was there. I could take care of her. I could feed her. I could give her an iPad or let her watch TV. But I wasn't really able to be her dad. And then now all of a sudden I am able to be her dad. I'm able to be a sober dad.
Yeah, to feel, to see.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this just for a little bit. And if we take a little longer, that's fine. Because a lot of stories stop here. A lot of stories, they show you a sober coin. They show you, hey, 5 years sober and 3 years sober, and it stops. But really is just the beginning. Being sober is just the beginning of a new journey. And because there is a lot of things inside of us that we still need to uncover, bring to light, and get rid of. And really just give it up to God. I mean, how many things? You still struggle with anger. You still struggle with, how many times did you say, I'm a bad dad, and you're not. It's like this video that we watched on Mother's Day. All the moms looking only how bad they are, and all the kids are looking only how good their mom is. And so you had this another journey and you're still on this journey to rediscover now who Dan Valentine is. To rediscover the real strength of Dan Valentine, to rediscover the art that you do, and tell me a little bit how you got to this point. Because the last question I want everyone to hear is what you told me on Sunday, okay. How art right now and how you realize the purpose of art, because God is leading you to purpose. God is leading you to meaningful life. And man, when you were telling me this on Sunday, I was just like, man, people need to hear it. So let's get to the second chapter.
Okay. So after I got sober, I ended up, I had always painted, like done fine art here and there. And I had always played music, but I could never, I didn't have that extra gear to where I could really make a painting that was good enough to sell or be in a gallery. And same with music. I had written a couple of songs and I could play pretty good, but wasn't quite there. And after I got sober, about 6 months after I got sober, I I had this experience where I started having all this music come into my head, and all these lyrics, and all these and I would have to write these songs, and they would come out in 10 minutes, sometimes 2 a day. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I was on so many drugs for so many years that all this stuff was repressed. And when I stopped, it all started coming out. And then it was like I could hear music better. I could play guitar better. I felt like my IQ did get higher. I was suppressed. So it was like somebody had turned the lights on. It was like the world was brighter. And this was 6 months after getting sober. The brain damage, when you're on drugs, you're brain damaged. You're mentally ill and you have brain damage.
Yeah.
So I started to heal from that. And then all the major blessings in my life have come through knowing Jason Shinholster, Impulse Church, and the Lifeline meeting and the AA groups that Jason runs. That's the guys that I've met in there. And there's a famous artist in town, and one of the guys at our group is friends with him, and he goes, "Hey, would you like to interview for a position to be this guy's painting assistant?" And I said, "Yeah." So I wait, and playing it cool, and then finally they call me for the interview, and I go in and meet this artist, and we just talked for 5 minutes, and I ended up getting the job. So now I'm a painting assistant for this really well-established, famous artist, and a really successful artist, makes a lot of money, commercially successful. So I end up working for this guy for 7 months, and we had a really good relationship. It ended up being a really good thing. And I saw what this guy was doing. And I saw what he was going through when he was painting, and I saw his process, and it gave me a license to paint. Because when I got done with that, call it an internship or whatever you want to call it. When I got done with that, I started making my own paintings. And this time I was sober, and I had worked for this person, and I could paint. So I was like, I can do this now. So now I'm able to actually create art, because before I knew that my art wasn't good enough. But now I can make pieces of art that I'm actually satisfied with, that I'm happy with. Right. And same with music too. And I couldn't do it before. And it's the opposite of what you hear, because the narrative that you hear is artists use drugs and alcohol to be creative. Mm-hmm. And that was the opposite of my experience. That's a lie. Drugs and alcohol will make you less inhibited, but they do not make you creative. They blunt creativity. Mm. So getting to what you were asking me about.
Now, you're painting, new world, you're sober, you're cleaner, your daughter's with you, but there is a lot of still going on, a lot. I know you had to, in the way, forgive your dad and forgive the past completely. You have to let go of the past. That moment brought clarity to you in the spiritual realm. You went back to focus retreat that we had. And I see the hunger in you in growing truly for God. And really, you're a different person. You look cool. You look awesome. I was scared of you the first time I saw you. I'm like, man, this guy's got either hurt himself or hurt somebody else. And then that was true. But now, after all this healing process, you said to me on Sunday about this artwork that finally gave you purpose. Tell me how, if you can, go back to this Sunday morning that you told me this, how you realized that artwork it's a purpose. It's something that God gave you. You realized that it was God's gift that you just suppressed inside you.
Yeah. So once I started making my own art, I didn't know at first why I was making it. And I thought, I'm just making it because I can do it. It's something that I can do, and I think I can make money with it. So it makes sense to do this. It makes financial sense. It makes sense. If I can do this, then I should do it. But I was struggling with the purpose behind it. And I had to kind of take a break from it for a couple of months to figure out, why am I doing this? Because I think there is a purpose behind it. It's not just for money. It's not just because I can do it. God gave me the ability to do it. I didn't make myself talented. God gave me that ability. And it's weird that it popped up when I was 40 years old, because normally people get started before then. But I literally couldn't. The ability was in me all the time, but I couldn't access it until I got off drugs and alcohol. And then I woke up at 40 and I was able to do this. It's like I woke up and I had an ability that I didn't have before that I locked into. But what I realized is the reason that I make art, like the concept behind it, is I want people to know that people can change, people can get better, people can heal. You know, and I want people to know that they can come through the darkness and they can forgive the people that hurt them, and they can have freedom. So now when I paint, you know, every canvas starts completely black, and I use the blackest black, like the lowest reflective. It's like looking it's like looking into the abyss. And then I add all the layers, the lighter layers on top. And then I let a little bit of dark show through here and there just to remember what it was like. But I want people to know that they're not stuck where they are. Like if you really want to get better, you know, God says, he says, I do not speak obscurities in some dark corner. He said, I would not tell you to seek me if I could not be found. And I want people to know that they can change and that God will heal them. And he healed me through people, because I had no faith in God. I believed in God, but I just believed God is not who he says he is. He's real. I believe he created the world. I believe he sent his son to die, but I don't think he's kind, because I've suffered a lot. And when I look at my suffering compared to other people in the world, their suffering is greater than mine. So it seems like this God that you're saying is so good, it's not really that good. And he doesn't really love us like he says he does. Otherwise, why would he allow us to suffer? So I didn't have any faith in God, even though I believed in God. And that's a really dark place to be. Because if you know God's real and you believe in him, but you think he's evil, I did think he was evil. Because if he's not who he says he is, then he's a liar, and then he's evil. So I believed that there was a God that wasn't really a good God. And that's depressing. That's why I wanted to die. That's my core belief, was that there was no hope. If God's powerful and omnipotent and made you, but doesn't really love you, that's depressing. Like, yeah, I wanted to die. Of course I wanted to die. And what God did was, because I had no faith in God, I thought maybe he would just come down and like change everything and fix my whole life. What he did was he sent people to rescue me. He sent Jason. He sent all the other guys that are in that group. And I have a committee of people that I can call. Not just one, but I can call people. And if I'm talking crazy or getting crazy ideas or something, you know, they will call me out, you know. And I have you, and you guys saved me. You guys, what happened was, I did not have a relationship with God. When I looked at you guys, and what Jason said was, well, do you believe that I believe? And I'm going like, yeah, I believe that you believe. I believe that God's doing a miracle in your life. And he's going like, okay, well, if you believe that, that's enough for now. And so, and then about a year into being sober, I started to say, I don't think I have a relationship with God. I still don't think I have a relationship with God. He's done all these incredible things, but I don't think I have a relationship, because all I do is just pray that he'll save me or pray that he'll fix this. And that's like a relationship where you never talk to your parents unless you need money. That's like that. So I started saying that. And then Jason's sponsor said to me, well, look, when I got here, I didn't have a relationship with God either, but I got one now. You'll get one. So then I went to the men's retreat, went to the focus group, and I was able to forgive my dad. You walked me through how to do that, which I was not expecting being able to do that, but I did. And it got a lot better, because before I wanted to drive up to my dad's house and kill him. That's how I felt before. I was really angry. Those thoughts would come into my head. But after I forgave him, that went away. And that's feeling like you want to kill your dad is a really bad place to be. Yeah. So that was the first step, was that went away. And then forgiveness is a process. It didn't all go away, because these feelings of anger would still come up. And then I'm remembering other things that happened. And I still get angry from time to time. But now I look at it like, look, that's my dad. That's the dad. That's the father that God chose for me. God knows what he's doing. And I was supposed to go through all this for a reason. That's the father that God chose for me. And he's sick. He's a human. He's sick. I don't have to hate him. I don't have to be angry at him. He's my earth dad. I have a heavenly father that is perfect. But there's no way I can hold my dad to these standards. He's obviously sick and unhappy, or he wouldn't have done all that. He wouldn't have been that way. So I'm not like, insanely angry wanting to kill my dad anymore, which is good.
And I want really everyone to see those little details that you're talking about, because sometimes Christianity shows themselves like in the Disney movie, and they lived happily ever after. And it's not the case, because Christianity, there is going to be suffering, but there's a purpose to that suffering. There is going to be some ups and downs. And Jesus said, you will have trouble for today, and that's enough. But there is a loving Father in heaven that loves us, that forgives us, and we can live these new people. Man, I'm looking at you. You're like a kid. You're like a brand new kid that God creates a new heart inside of you. And God showed me that vision about your heart when we were praying. I'm like, man, I was praying and I saw how God is just like a loving Father creating a new heart in you. And it's cool, man. It's cool to see that you're 40 years old. You're 40. I'm 41, right?
I'm 41 now.
You're 41. You're exactly my age. And you can go through this transformation. Man, what's next? Because here's the thing. I mean, I have your artwork. I bought that with our youth when we were raising funds for youth. I still have it in my office. It's in my office. It's right in front of me, the shores and the sea. And I said these words to you that I still believe. And then one day, I'm going to tell the world that I know Dan Valentine. He goes to my church. I'm telling you, because the art that you're creating, the heart that you have, the purpose that you have, people's going to see. People's going to buy. We're going to show you a few of your artwork during this podcast. But I want the world to see that God can do a transformative work inside of you, and he can do the same transformative work in everybody who's willing to change their life. Do you believe that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with these words, Dan, I thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for being transparent. I know it's hard to talk about the past. I know it's hard to talk about different things, but thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing your faith. And I know it's going to touch many people. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you, buddy.
And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you, turn his face towards you. Check out his artwork. We're going to leave a link underneath. Check out his website, all the stuff that he does. It is amazing. And don't forget to buy it and support our amazing artist, Mr. Dan Valentine. Until next time.